Guys, we're talking about the cardiovascular system, the cardiac muscle mechanics. This lecture is about the preload and afterload. You know that to measure the heart's performance, we have 5 parameters. We have heart rate, conduction velocity, the preload, afterload, and contractility. We have done the other things, and now this lecture is about the preload and afterload. And this is the review of it. We've done the full length lecture separately. So let's see what it means. What do we need to understand? Preload and afterload tell us the relationship of the length of the cardiac tissue before it contracts, so that is called pre-stretch, to the tension that will be generated in the cardiac tissue, which will create the force of contraction and push the blood out. It's all about trying to return the venous blood that came into the ventricles back to the systemic circulation or the pulmonary circulation. So what we need to understand in this whole thing is, number one, what is the sarcomere length and what is its role in this whole situation, preload and afterload. Then what is preload, what is Frank-Starling law, what is the contractility's relationship in the preload, and we'll also then talk about afterload and the velocity of the contraction. So first of all, sarcomere. We have done the sarcomere many times. The structure is here. We have myosin thick filaments, we have thin filaments that are composed of actin, troponin, and tropomyosin. We know that for this sarcomere to contract or relax, we need the calcium and the ATP. And of course, there could be passive tension, passive stretch as well, which is in case of the heart, as the blood pours in the ventricle, that stretches the sarcomere. This is a conceptual diagram or simplified diagram of the sarcomere. What this shows is that the myosin fiber is here in the center, and the actin fiber are here, the blue ones, and these green are the active sites on the actin fibers. These actin sites or the active sites and the myosin heads, they will cycle and they would connect with each other to create the contraction and detention. Tension simply means that one head continues to cycle on the same active site. That is tension. And contraction means that one head walks to the next one and it just moves the actin inwards or outwards. So that is the sarcomere. The role of contractility is this. We have done this many times in our other lectures for the cardiovascular system. As the calcium comes in, it is the volume, it's the quantity of the calcium inside a myofibril that dictates the number of cross bridges that would be established. How? By two mechanisms. Calcium phosphorylates through the MLCK, myosin light chain kinase. It helps phosphorylate the myosin head, the light chains on the head, and that opens up the active site on the myosin head. Calcium also works with the troponin and primes the troponin and asks the troponin to remove the tropomyosin and to expose the active sites which will take part in the contraction. So now realize this. As the sarcomere is stretched, for example, when the muscle is relaxing, when the muscle is pulled, in case of ventricles, the muscle is pulled with the filling. As the sarcomere is stretched, what happens is that increased calcium, more calcium comes in. How does it come in more? Number one, there are more channels that open up. Number two, the sarcomere itself becomes more sensitive to calcium. For example, the troponin becomes more sensitive to the calcium that is in. So stretching actually causes the calcium to come in. One more thing that happens is stretching causes titin protein that is bound to myosin to adjust the myosin head against the actin, and that also optimizes for contraction and tension. So that is the role of a sarcomere. Now we have to understand, how does that sarcomere's length work for the preload. So first of all, let's define the preload. Preload is the amount or the volume of the blood and the pressure of the blood in a ventricle before the systole starts. So you can also call it end diastolic volume and end diastolic pressure together make up the preload. The understanding here is this, that preload causes the pre-stretch. What that means is that as the ventricles fill, the sarcomere in the myofibrils that are stretched because of the filling. So depending upon how much filling is there, if more filling, then the stretch is more, And what we need to do is, if more filling, stretch more means there is more blood. And if there is more blood, what do we want to do? We want to push the more blood out. So increased filling in a physiological condition should mean increased force of contraction. So that means increased preload in physiological state will result into increased cardiac output, which means increased venous return, which means increased filling, right? Increased venous return will be met by increased cardiac output, which means if a muscle is exercising or if a tissue has increased the flow, that will mean increased venous return. That would also mean increased cardiac output. And how is that increased venous return is met with the increased cardiac output? Through the mechanism of pre-stretch of a sarcomere and increased force of contraction. So that is the role of preload. Now, preload can also be called that it is equal to end diastolic volume and pressure. We talked about it. Preload explains the force of contraction or the change in the force of contraction. Remember, contractility explains that when a muscle is at rest and at a constant length, what is the tension in it? Preload would define that when the muscle will move, what is the tension in it? That is the difference between them. Now let's look at it here. These 3-4 graphs are all related to the preload. What happens is, let's say this is a sarcomere. This sarcomere here is a length 4 micrometer. What does that mean? This is the longest sarcomere that you can see. So the ventricle has been filled so much. The person is doing rigorous exercise. There's a lot of blood that is coming back in, and ventricle is really stretched. Now with this much stretch, the binding sites of actin and myosin are just very barely touching each other. They're just overlapping. Out of 1,000 sites, just 2 of them are overlapping. There is not going to be enough contraction or tension or force. So remember, if you overstretch, the muscle would fail to then create tension in it. So here, if you see, this is the length of the sarcomere and this is the tension developed. As the length goes beyond an optimal length, then the tension developed reduces. Now, what is the optimal length for the heart? Optimal length of the heart, the optimal length of the sarcomere for cardiac tissue is between 2 and 2.2 micrometers. This length is called L0. If a sarcomere is within this range of stretch, then it provides the best number of quantity and volume of cross bridges, best overlap between actin and myosin to produce the right tension. Anything lesser than that or more than that will not have the right tension. So if you see here, these are the lengths of the sarcomeres and this is the tension created. So if the sarcomere length is too much, tension is not great. If the sarcomere length is still not small enough, still too much, tension is not great. However, if the length of sarcomere is within the optimal range, then you would see that the tension is optimal as well. So remember that pre-stretch would define the tension, and the tension is not always that you stretch more and the tension is more. No, there is this graph. Now let's look at this. There is a concept of passive tension and active tension. Passive tension is that the tension or the tone present in a muscle when it is at rest or when it is stretched. So now what happens is, as you continue to relax a muscle or stretch a muscle, I'm stretching my biceps at this time, as you increase the length of the sarcomere, the passive tension, the tone in the muscle starts increasing. Now we just saw that it is not going to be because of the cross bridges, because cross bridges are actually reducing, because actin and myosin are going away from each other. So who is producing this tension? This tension is produced by titin. Titin, when you move the sarcomere, when you stretch the sarcomere, titin starts bringing the actin and myosin close together. So that is the new research, that titin actually helps produce the passive tension. How about the active tension? Active tension is when a muscle is actually moving, when it is actually contracting, then the force of contraction that is produced in there is called the active tension. This force of contraction is actually going to be a sum of passive plus active tension. However, the active tension itself only works within an optimal stage, and that is what we saw here, within the length 0, the active tension becomes maximum, but if the pre-stretch is more or too less, then the active tension drops as well. So here if you see, we have the active tension graph which drops after the limits, passive tension which continues to increase, and here is a sum, the green line is a sum of both the tensions. So it's very simple, when the active tension goes and drops down to 0, then the sum of the tension is only going to be the passive tension, because now the active tension is gone, so what is left is passive tension. That is why this line over here starts going with the passive tension. This is where the active tension has stopped. So that is how to understand this one. Now how do we measure the preload? Very simple. Preload is the end diastolic volume and pressure. So the preload, the right measurement of the preload is the end diastolic pressure and volume. That is what defines the pre-stretch. However, putting something in there to measure it is not easy. How about then we go to the left atrium? So if we can't go to left ventricle, then going to left atrium is going to be difficult. So that's not easy either. How about the pulmonary arteries, the ones that are bringing blood back from the lungs to the left atrium? Well, same problem. How would we reach those arteries? So fine, that we cannot do either. So how about pulmonary vein? Yes, the pulmonary wedge pressure can be used as a reliable index, not the accurate index, but sort of a hint for what is happening for the preload. So how do we do that? We have done a lecture about it. The Swan-Ganz catheter is moved from the superior vena cava into the right atrium to the right ventricle, from there to the pulmonary artery and out until it cannot go any further and it gets wedged. That is why it is called the wedge pressure. So pulmonary wedge pressure is the one that we can measure, and that is a good reliable index. Now that is about the preload. So what preload does is, pre-stretch increases the force of contraction. So preload is related to the force of contraction, and this mechanism is called the Frank-Starling law. So what does Frank-Starling law explain? It explains that the increased stretch would cause increased force of contraction, and why does that happen and how? That is the mechanism here. Now afterload. Afterload is the resistance against which the heart is going to pump to move the blood out, to eject the blood. So what is the resistance? Let's look at the heart. For the left ventricle, it has to squeeze the blood to move that blood in the aorta. Remember that at the end of diastole, aortic valves are closed. These valves are closed, and the ventricle is going in a diastole. After filling, it's going to start squeezing, it's going to go in systole, and when it is squeezing, the blood cannot go back to the atria because these valves are going to close. So it has to go into the ventricle, aorta, but aortic pressure is about 80 millimeter mercury. So now the ventricle has to produce enough force and velocity of contraction that it can overcome the 80 millimeter of mercury pressure and open these valves and push the blood out in the aorta. So that resistance, that pressure here is called the afterload. How about the right ventricle? What is the afterload for the right ventricle? Of course, the pulmonary artery pressure. Now, what will afterload dictate? What will it do? Afterload not only establishes the force of contraction, because you have to squeeze the blood against a particular resistance, but you also have to rapidly squeeze to create enough velocity that blood flows rapidly. So the velocity of contraction is also dictated by the afterload. So afterload primarily drives the velocity. So what is that mechanism here? So let's look at it. Here is a chart, here's a graph. This is afterload, and we are increasing the afterload. That means this is the aortic pressure, and that is increasing in case of the left heart. Let's say the aortic pressure is 0. When the aortic pressure is 0, do you think that the ventricle is going to do a lot of work to push the blood out? No, there's no resistance. It's just going to squeeze and blood is out. So velocity of the contraction will be the fastest. Let's put some pressure in it. Let's say 20 millimeter of mercury. So we increase the afterload. Do you think now we can squeeze with the same very quick rapid fire? No. we have some resistance, so we have to squeeze harder, we have to squeeze faster. So now the velocity will reduce and the force of contraction, this blue line is the force of contraction, this will have to increase. We have to push. And as you continue to increase the afterload, the force of contraction will need to increase, velocity of contraction will reduce. So afterload dictates the balance between the force and velocity. So that is what we have. Thank you.